up, TCK Potters? Welcome back to the program. This is another episode of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Sky Guasco, joined by my man, Bobby Lamarco. We have a very, very special episode and video for you today. We are officially joining and a part of the launch of the Fantasy Football Network. We want to give a huge shout out to our good brothers, Kyle and Corey Dozier of Boom Bust Fantasy Football. You've had them on the program a couple of times. Kyle most recently with a few mock drafts and Corey behind the scenes as well. We have all sorts of goodies. We've been kind of alluding to this for a couple of weeks now, and we are officially live for the launch of the Fantasy Football Network. It's an incredible network, YouTube-based. So for the podcasters, if you haven't already, make sure you come up and find us on the YouTubes. And you can find 20-plus other independent fantasy football channels, so you can have 24/7 fantasy football content on the Fantasy Football Network. Catch it on YouTube. Of course, we're on Instagram and Twitter as well. Bobby, I'm very excited for this launch, man. You and I have been kind of like biting our tongue a little bit on air, trying to tease, but not get into it too far. We are eventually going to wrap up our NFC South team previews and the team previews overall. We got studs and duds for two more divisions coming up, but this is our last focus on a team preview. We'll get into that in just a bit. But before we do, man, how are you feeling about this launch? I'm really excited.
I mean, listen, me and you kind of known about this for a couple weeks now or so. I've been talking with Kyle and Corey. And listen, this is like the one-stop shop for fantasy football. Like, finally, like NFL, think of an NFL network. And every time you go to that channel, it's football. This is what the Fantasy Football Network is going to be for everyone. You can go and constantly see new content. You got to go check out the site. It is fantastic. It's a great way to find, if you're a little behind on research, you want to know what the sleepers are. And if you are interested in like hot topics, for example, brought to you by Bomb Banana Hot Sauce, seekthespice.com. So I just want to, as everyone knows, is the TCK Pod Hot topic of the day. I want to bring up something for you, Sky. Michael Thomas, the injury to him has been kind of an issue for a lot of fantasy football managers. Are you willing to draft Michael Thomas at all in 2021?
Oh, boy. This one's a tough subject. I am going to cover the Saints here in depth in a little bit, so I'll try to save some of this. My short answer, Bobby, I super duper hate to say this and start the show on a negative note. My answer is no. I am not willing to draft Michael Thomas this year in redraft. I have been hit up a couple times to acquire Michael Thomas in Dynasty. Maybe, but you still don't know what the quarterback situation is. And in my opinion, Michael Thomas is going to get traded either before the trade deadline this year or after this year. I've been over it a couple of different times, and I'll get into it later. He's just not a good clubhouse guy for the Saints right now. He's more of a pain in the ass than I think he's worth. The talent is incredible, but we saw with Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell with the Steelers, franchises don't want to deal with you. You're out the door. Michael Thomas, unfortunately, on the wrong side of that coin. Fall into the 8th round, the 9th round, whatever, I'm still going to pass. Surgery in June on an ankle, I'm not coming into that. I think it's a trap. Yes, he could have nice games. I'll get into his stats from last year, which were disappointing as well. I just think that we've seen the best of Michael Thomas 2 years ago, and I'm not biting again.
You know what, man? That is a great answer. And once again, guys, just as a reminder, this hot topic is brought to you by Bomb Banana Hot Sauce. If you haven't visited seekthespice.com, I suggest you do. This is a banana-based, not a banana-flavored hot sauce. If you use that promo code TCK, you get 10% off your order. Now that we teased you a little bit with some great stats from Sky and about the Saints, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons, why we're here today. We're going to be talking about the Falcons and the Saints. Now let's talk about the Falcons. Of course, the biggest news of this entire team is now we're switching over to Arthur Smith's offense. Now, we'll break that down in just a second, but it's important to note that this is a completely different style of offense, kind of something similar that we saw back in 2015 and 16 with Matt Ryan under Matt LaFleur and Kyle Shanahan. So there is some continuity in that aspect, but this is a complete overhaul. Now, the offensive line, there has been some changes. Listen, Alex Mack, yes, he was technically the PFF number 16 center last year, but he was a steady veteran. He's now gone. James Carpenter, one of their guards, he actually graded pretty poorly at 59. He's gone. Also, Caleb McGarry, who actually played a lot of right tackle last year, is coming off an injury, so we're not really sure about his future. So there is a couple shakeups along that offensive line. They also drafted Jalen Mayfield in that 3rd round. So there is some movement up front. that makes you a little concerned. But Arthur Smith has been really good in the run game over the last couple of years with Derrick Henry. His offensive line, especially in adjusted line yards, has been elite. So I'm excited to see what he can do for this ground game that's introducing some new skill position players. Of course, the loss of Julio Jones is the headliner here. Julio gone means, what does that mean for Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, Kyle Pitts, who, by the way, is their number 4 overall pick. And, of course, Mike Davis coming in this offseason to play the running back position. So a lot of movement around the actual skill position players for the Falcons. So I'm extremely interested to dive in. But before I do, Sky, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you feel about some of the shakeups on the offensive line and also the change to Arthur Smith? You're muted.
Geez, trying to be too professional here with the new network, and I cut myself off. I love the call with Arthur Smith coming over. Dan Quinn wasn't the right person for the job, in my opinion. We saw what the Falcons and Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and a bit of Calvin Ridley were capable of with Kyle Shanahan a few years ago before he goes to the 49ers. Of course, Julio's gone now. But the efficiency we saw with the Tennessee Titans, Bobby and I broke down the AFC South and the Tennessee Titans just the last episodes. I love what the Titans have been able to do. Matt Ryan doesn't run like Ryan Tannehill can, but I certainly think he has certainly the arm and the pocket presence. And now that Julio is in Tennessee instead of Atlanta, Ryan doesn't have the same weapons, but Calvin Ridley, I think, is all world. And I truly believe that Calvin Ridley could potentially be the number 1 overall fantasy receiver this year. He could see some Devonte Adams type work all over the field if he stays healthy. So I like the move over there. The offensive line, man, it really, the story of the Falcons has been underachievement since the 2016 Super Bowl, and it's 100% been because of injuries. These guys got to stay healthy on both sides of the ball.
Yeah. And listen, one of the things I'll talk about right now, and it really starts with Matt Ryan. I mean, when they went with Kyle Pitts instead of guys like Justin Fields in that area or Mac Jones, it's, you know what, we can win now. That's how they feel, which is super weird that they trade Julio Jones. It's kind of like, why? If you think you could win now, why do you trade Julio Jones? But that's neither here or there. But Matt Ryan is interesting. We're here to talk about fantasy, folks. And let's talk about Matt Ryan's journey over the last few years. Matt Ryan has constantly seen a new offensive coordinator every 2 years. So the best part, too, is we have all this data. Everyone makes fun of Matt Ryan because of the fact that in the odd years, he's bad, and the even years, he's good. But what does that mean? He means system continuity. He's constantly changing coordinators every 2 years. So let's break down those actual points per game performances in his first year with coordinators, second year with coordinators. Let's start in 2015 with Kyle Shanahan. He finished with 17.1 points per game, the QB 19 that season. His second year with Kyle Shanahan, he jumps to 26.3 and the QB 2. Everyone's all excited. They start drafting Matt Ryan. Kyle Shanahan leaves, insert Sarkisian. He comes in, QB 15, 16.8 points per game. The following season, QB 2. 2019, Dirk Koyter comes in. He's the new offensive coordinator, QB 11. Now, in 2020, the injury to Julio Jones, listen, we know the splits with Matt Ryan, with and without Julio Jones. It's not great. Hopefully, Kyle Pitts can fill some of that void. But listen, the 5 full games with Ridley and Julio, when they played the entire game, he was playing 26 points per game. That was his MVP type season. So I just think that Matt Ryan is another quarterback where there's a lot of disruption. Currently today, he's going about 133rd overall. That's about the 11th round, according to NFC ADP. And personally, I'm not really buying Matt Ryan in the first year of a scheme again. So for fantasy purposes, I'm not too excited. Plus, he doesn't offer much in the ground game. Plus, he just lost Julio Jones. But let's talk about some of the things that are important. Last season, he's going from the most pass-heavy offensive coordinator since 2011. That's Dirk Koyter. So if you look at just dropbacks, Dirk Koyter's offenses have always been pass-heavy. Arthur Smith has been with Tennessee since 2011. Every single person is going to sit here and tell me that Arthur Smith had Derrick Henry. It predates Derrick Henry. Since 2011, when he became an offensive position coach with the Titans, they have been the team with the lowest dropbacks per year. This is a huge difference in my opportunity now, so I'm calling for a minus 113 dropbacks this season. That's not going to go all the way down to the area where we saw last year for the Titans, but overall, it's still going to be a major regression. But it's not all bad. The one thing that Arthur Smith did a lot with Ryan Tannehill was play action pass. He led the NFL last season with Ryan Tannehill at 36% of his passes were in play action. That's fantastic. Why is that fantastic? Matt Ryan is really good in play action. Averaged 4.8 more completion percentage higher in play action. Also averaged 1.15 more yards per attempt. So it's not all bad. But however, year one, I'm not feeling Matt Ryan. We've seen constantly this guy when he changes offenses. It takes him a little time to get used to it. But that's my thoughts on Matt Ryan. I think he's a complete fade. What's your thoughts, Guy?
Ooh, a complete fade's tough because, I mean, you're not going to reach for Matt Ryan anyway. He will maybe fall this year with Julio leaving and a new offense. He might fall to that late round QB area. And if he does, I think he's – I don't know about a steal, but he's in that area. For me, he's QB 15 still. So I would love to have him as a back end, quarterback one with that weekly upside. Trevor Lawrence, Big Ben, Baker Mayfield, Joe Burrow as of right now, Kirk Cousins, kind of that range. So he's not where he has been over the years. I've had Matt Ryan in my top 10 for 10 years in a row or something like that. He's not going to be there. And I agree with you with the continuity. You mentioned that a lot. And that is something very important. And look, again, Ryan Tannehill finished number 7 last year, but he had 7 rushing touchdowns. You're never going to get that from Matt Ryan. So he's got to have 4,500 plus passing yards, which he might have if that defense doesn't come together. But you're strictly banking on passing yardage, which we saw from Brady last year, but not having the weapons and the continuity this year and the scheme changing a little bit more to the run heavy, which we'll talk about in a second. I don't know that I'm fully fading him. He's a great second quarterback in super flex leagues and at the end of your bench, maybe in a redraft league. If you go late on quarterbacks, I would look for him there, but I'm not as excited as I have been over the years.
Let's talk about that ground game, Sky. Mike Davis. I hate doing team previews because it makes me like players I don't want to like, and that's what happened with Mike Davis. I hate the research.
Well, you're going to, spoiler alert, you're going to have to convince me. You're going to have to convince me, so go for it.
Well, here we go. Everyone's going to talk constantly about the Derrick Henry thing. The Arthur Smith offense predates Derrick Henry. Arthur Smith has been in Titans coaching staff. I just brought this up since 2011. This offense went through the exotic smash mouth phase. There was an offensive coaching staff that called their run game exotic smash mouth. So that's where Arthur Smith is growing from all those years. Mike Mularkey, Mike Munchak. And it predates Derrick Henry. Chris Johnson, DeMarco Murray both had campaigns since that time with over 275 carries. Now, that's one thing that I will say about Mike Davis, too, is the blocking scheme. Last season, Derrick Henry under Arthur Smith had 68% of his carries in zone versus gap schemes. Why is that important? Last year, Mike Davis was down to 45% with the Panthers. His best season on the ground was 2018 with the Seattle Seahawks. That season, he was right at Derrick Henry's number at 2/3 of his carries being in zone. So I do like the fact that they're going to run more zone. That's a better fit for Mike Davis. He averaged 4.6 yards per carry in there. Now, I understand the limited pass game role for Derrick Henry the last 2 years, but that's a Ryan Tannehill thing. Listen, if you go back to 2018, before Tannehill, Mariota was the starting quarterback, Deion Lewis saw over 60 targets in a shared role with Derrick Henry. So that's very interesting. Also, if you look at guys like DeMarco Murray, he saw at least 60 targets in a season in this kind of offense when Arthur Smith was the coaching staff. So it isn't just I don't think it's actually a Titans Arthur Smith thing. It's actually a play calling style, a passing style from Ryan Tannehill. And what also shows that is 2015 and 2016. Remember, Matt LaFleur was the QB coach for Matt Ryan in Atlanta. Then he took over as OC in 2018. That's the offense Arthur Smith took over and continued to use the last 2 years. In those 2 seasons, Devonte Freeman with the Atlanta Falcons had 81 targets a season. So it's not unheard of to say that he could see a significant pass game role, especially with guys like Hayden Hurst, Russell Gage. Yes, they're starting caliber players, and they are good, but they are not elite talents. So it's behind Pitts and behind Calvin Ridley, we could potentially see Mike Davis earning a solid role in that pass game. So that's why I've kind of grown. I'm like the Grinch that stole Christmas, and my heart was really small. And then next thing you know, I heard them singing, and Mike Davis started singing to me, and I'm like, you know what? I might love again. So that's kind of why I'm buying Mike Davis now a little bit in the 5th round.
Man, shouts out to Cindy Lou Who for changing the vibes for Bobby Lamarco. Love to hear that. Look, man, here's the deal. The opportunity is there. if Mike Davis is 60% of Derrick Henry, you're going to be very excited for having Mike Davis in, the middle rounds or whatever as a back end RB2 right now, RB24 in ADP currently. It strictly comes down to his durability for me. This is an issue. He's been in the league quite a while, was never quite a starter. Last year, he would not have sniffed the field in Carolina if CMC had not gone down. Now that's part of fantasy football. That's part of NFL football. These backups get an opportunity. CJ Anderson a couple years ago basically carried the Rams the rest of the way to the Super Bowl because Todd Gurley flamed out. It happens every single year, but he just would not have gotten the opportunity by himself. Now he's, good for him. He made it work in Carolina. He got paid. He moves on to Atlanta, and nobody else is there except for Javion Hawkins. But Mike Davis only started 10 games before 2020. He put up 1,000 yards in 15 games. So decent, but not terribly impressive. He scored 8 touchdowns. That helped bolster him in fantasy football. But 1,000 total yards in 15 games is not incredible in today's NFL. He's also missed 34 games in his career due to injury. So he's played 62 out of 96, and he's missed 34 games in his career over injury. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I do like him early on, and he's Raheem Mostert is another guy, Melvin Gordon. These are running backs I'm willing to draft as my RB3 potentially in the middle rounds or whatever, but immediately looking for rookies to come in later. A Michael Carter, a Trey Sermon, somebody like that who was down the depth chart a little bit, a Phillip Lindsay even, to wait a month. And if these guys fade out, then I have somebody to have the bolster over Mike Davis, because honestly, man, I hate to say it, but it's like James Conner. It's like, I know the talent's there. I know the workload's going to be there. Can he actually hold up to it? I don't think he will. So I'm willing to draft him and redraft, but I'm immediately looking to either move him 3 or 4 weeks in and just avoid the cliff if it comes, or draft in accordance so that way I can have a backup coming the other way. So I know the workload's going to be there. I've been doing a lot of research. We got our studs and duds coming up. So spoiler alert, he's on that list somewhere. I'll leave you guessing. But I've done a lot of research on Mike Davis as well. And unfortunately, Bobby, spoiler alert, I think I'm on the other side of the fence, but we'll continue that conversation later.
Listen, I'm still the Grinch. I'm not buying Mike Davis as my primary guy. I'm just saying that I'm not completely off him like I was. I was like not even thinking about him in the 5th, 6th round. I was like, I'm not interested. But now I'm like, if certain receivers, like if Hawkinson Andrews is gone, certain receivers like Higgins and Chase are gone, and I'm looking at guys that I'm not that interested in, I will look at Mike Davis as a potential flex in that 5th, 6th round area.
I'm going to throw some quick names at you with ADP, not necessarily on the clock. We'll just do running backs. I'm going to throw some quick numbers at you, and then we'll move on here. Mike Davis going at the RB24. So I'm just going to throw you general running backs going in that area. You can pick your format. Travis Etienne, Mike Davis.
A receiver.
Miles Sanders, Mike Davis.
Miles Sanders, that's not even close. And by the way, I don't know why you brought up Miles Sanders. You know that gets me going, all right? So Miles Sanders.
Kareem Hunt, Mike Davis.
Wide receiver.
Javonte Williams or Melvin Gordon.
Ooh, Javonte. I mean, I love him in Dynasty. I'm going to go Javonte. I just care about him too much.
Okay, Josh Jacobs.
Josh Jacobs.
All right, and Darrell Henderson.
Oh, Henderson. We got to talk about Henderson. A different podcast. We got to talk about Henderson because there's something going on there.
But again, he's in that mix of like you want the volume and you'll get the volume. And look, anybody giving you 15, 20 touches a game should be on your fantasy roster. My issue is that I can't guarantee that'll continue to happen after week 5 or 6. And at my RB3, I'm starting to look ahead a little bit. That's just where I'm at. So we can move on. But I do feel like you and I are kind of not in agreement on Mike Davis right now.
Yeah, that's fine. And listen, Quadre Allison's like the main backup. So Quadre Allison couldn't beat out guys like Ito Smith and Brian Hill. But Quadre Allison is like, if you're going to think of a guy kind of like Derrick Henry, he's a big boy. And my thing is like, Quadre Allison has earned his number 2 reps. And listen, like you just brought up, all the things about Mike Davis you're worried about, his injury history and all this stuff, and never been a workhorse. That kind of makes Quadre Allison a little interesting in later rounds too. So he might be someone you can look at. If, for example, you lean towards Sky side, if you want to bet against Mike Davis, it might not be a bad idea to take Quadre Allison in the last round. And I have him in my Dynasty League, so that's great.
Damn.
All right, let's talk about Calvin Ridley. And before I get into my numbers.
This is my boo.
I was a little disappointed in my research about Calvin Ridley. I love Calvin Ridley. He's my wide receiver 4, but I thought he could be more. So the Arthur Smith scheme does feature a legit number 1 receiver. So Arthur Smith, if we're going to assume that he's going to use the same system the last couple of years, he took over for Matt LaFleur. Remember, Matt LaFleur, his offense just produced Devonte Adams. Julio Jones in 2015 had 200 targets in this offense. So there is room for this idea. And remember, that first year was Kyle Shanahan. Matt LaFleur comes in 2015. They basically gave Julio 200 targets. So Calvin Ridley realistically could lead the NFL in targets. That's not even remotely not a possibility. So I do love Calvin Ridley, but I thought when I was going through the numbers and when I thought he would be probably higher, I thought he'd be closer to Tyreek Hill than he would be Stephon Diggs. But I still think I would take Diggs over Ridley, and here's why. If you look at the games over the last 2 seasons that in half-point PPR that he played with Julio Jones when Julio missed or played less than 50% of the snaps, he averaged 10 targets a game, which is awesome. But he only averaged 16 points per game in those games. So it does kind of make me think twice. I'm like, okay, there was one game in that little mix where he went 0 for 0 against Jair Alexander. He was a little banged up in that game, but 16 points per game is not what I thought it was. I thought it was going to be a lot higher. And it might be because he's getting more defensive attention. It might be because the fact that the Falcons outside of Calvin Ridley didn't have anybody that would demand any attention. So right there could be kind of the issue for why Calvin Ridley wasn't as explosive on 10 targets as we thought he would. But 16 points is still elite. It's still wide receiver 4. So I'm still all in on Calvin Ridley today. But I'm just saying, when you look at the number splits, but plus when I talked about this a little bit earlier, the potential downturn in projected dropbacks. Last 2 seasons, they were Dirk Koiter, who was literally the most pass-heavy offensive mind in football. Those 10 targets be closer probably to 8 in a system like Arthur Smith, who is probably going to be closer to the 600 dropback range in this offense versus 700, which is what we saw with Matt Ryan and Dirk Koiter. So I think today, Calvin Ridley is a difference maker wide receiver. I still have him ahead of guys like A.J. Brown, who you guys all know I love, DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson. But I don't think I was originally going into this thinking he was going to be my number 3 behind Tyreek Hill and Devonte Adams, but I'm still going to take Diggs over him. So I think he's my wide receiver 4 based on some of the things I found out, but I think it's very exciting, and I think he's a very safe pick in the mid to late second round.
I love it, man. I love Calvin Ridley, and I expect him to have a huge role this year. Like I just said, if he stays healthy, which we know Julio's troubles. Calvin Ridley, unfortunately, has had his issues staying healthy as well. If he stays healthy for 15, 16 of these 17 games, I think he can lead the NFL in targets. He is great down the field. He's a mid-range guy as well. He's a great red zone weapon, as we know. He's basically stolen half of Julio Jones' targets over the last couple of years. So he's a great route runner. I mean, we're seeing video now where he's turning the, Byron Jones, Xavier Howard for the Dolphins, who are arguably the best cornerback tandem in the NFL. And they had one-on-one drills just the other day in camp, and there's video of Calvin Ridley spinning both these guys like a top. I mean, he's a beast. Again, though, it comes down to the scheme, Bobby, and I appreciate that you break this down so often because, yes, the talent's amazing and the player's amazing and the connection with Matt Ryan matters, but it always comes down to it. Look, like A.J. Brown's all-world as well, but he's had a capped ceiling because of the offense. Now he brings in Julio Jones as well. So, unfortunately, I might have to temper my expectations, but Calvin Ridley's also in my top 4 as well.
So let's move on. And listen, with Julio Jones gone, Russell Gage, when I went into this, I didn't even think I was going to talk about him. But then I realized he's 11th round ADP. Mm-hmm. This guy has an 11th round ADP. I'm going to pause for a minute. 11th round. Okay? So last year, he had 110 targets. And he produced 8.7 points per game in half-point PPR on 110 targets. Like, what are we like? If Russell Gage is not going to get more targets, but even when he got 110 targets last year, Julio Jones barely played. He played like 5 full games, and there was no Kyle Pitts. And then the back, Todd Gurley was doing whatever. Todd Gurley, whatever. He scored touchdowns, but he wasn't even a factor in the pass game. And now you got Mike Davis. He's going in the 11th round. just please don't. Just don't do it. I mean, for us, like, I can't. So anyway, the reason why he's one of my regression candidates, I just talked about him in my football.rasbon, my fantasy points per reception article. He's one of the regression candidates because he actually scored more points than he was supposed to on his receptions, and he still averaged 8.7 points per game. He's going in the 11th round. Also, the Titans offense before 2020. In 2020, Corey Davis finished as the wide receiver 31, which is fine, but he was the only, prior to 2020, the Titans as a team only had, you had to go all the way back to 2013, was the last time they had 2 wide receivers in the top 50. Top 50. So the story of this little segment is, please don't draft Russell Gage. Back to you, Sky.
See, that's tough, man, because I feel like my man Russell Gage has work opportunity, but Kyle Pitts just might end up being that second option. And Russell Gage has done a hell of a job over the last couple of years, being that number 3, that number 4. Mohamed Sanu was there, of course, a few years as well before he moved on. So he's been okay. You're right. I mean, but again, man, you're taking a stab late round. Bobby, again, I'll throw some quick names at you. Russell Gage or Devontae Parker?
Parker.
Henry Ruggs.
T.Y.
Hilton. Jalen
Rager.
Mecole Hardman.
Marvin
Jones and Corey Davis, I know you love. Elijah Moore.
Elijah Moore, yeah, more. Everybody.
Okay, everybody. So he's even further down there for you. I do agree drafting-wise, but again, I think Russell Gage is going to be somebody that people are going to forget about because they haven't known his name yet in public leagues, and you'll get some work. Before we move on, man, we do have a question here. I want to jump into the YouTube side. It's relevant. We're talking Julio Jones. I want to jump in here really quick. Max from YouTube has a question for us. Let's bring it up here, Bobby. I got offered Waddle and Deontay Johnson for Julio Jones. Do I accept? Now, this seems like an automatic smash, but we don't know if it's dynasty, redraft, PPR. So walk me through it really quickly and we'll get back to it.
It doesn't matter. Deontay Johnson is the best player in this actual draft. So I'm taking this 100%. Deontay Johnson, I broke him down in our Steelers preview. He's also my stud in the NFC AFC North. The reason why is this. Him and Devontae Adams were neck to neck in target distribution last year. He was literally so dominant on a target basis. He's taking over that Antonio Brown role, and we saw it last year. And listen, I talked about his drops. In the years, there were 60 receivers over the last 10 years who had at least double-digit drops. The next year, it got cut in half. So the drops that are a problem, I probably project won't be a problem. Plus, you cannot match his targets. So I think he's an elite. He actually, outside, if you remove the 2 games he was injured, he's actually inside the top 10 for points per game last season.
Would you go Deontay Johnson over Julio straight up?
Yes.
Okay, so Jalen Waddle essentially is just a consolation prize.
If this is dynasty, it's a no-brainer.
Well, it's a no-brainer, yeah.
Redraft. Yeah, if it's redraft, listen, I'm okay with it. I think it's fine. I would take Deontay Johnson in every single way and form 100%.
Okay. Max, I'm going to agree with Bobby as well. He said it very well. Appreciate you jumping in. Anyone else listening up or tuning in on Periscope, Facebook, or YouTube, feel free to drop any questions you have relative to the Falcons, which Julio counts out of respect. Yeah. Falcons or a Titan, Falcons or Saints, and we can answer those questions for you here. We're going to get carried on the rest of the way. Bobby, go ahead with the rest of the Falcons break.
Yeah, so it comes to Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is probably a very polarizing player because, like, your brain tells you he's a rookie tight end, but your heart and soul says he's
a third-round wide receiver.
He's a special, sweet angel boy. So, and I'm going to break down just my bullet points that I kind of walk through. So the pros for him, he is a absolute stud. So let's talk about 99th percentile 40-yard dash, 98% percentile speed score. The Titans, under Arthur Smith last year, were 3rd in the NFL in tight end points per game. So they use the tight end heavy. Arthur Smith is a tight ends coach background. You got to love it. And he was the 4th overall pick. That premium pick means that they're going to use him. The cons, the best rookie seasons of the last decade. Evan Ingram, 9.4 points per game. Rob Gronkowski, 8.5 points per game. That's not difference maker numbers. That's not somebody you take in the 4-5 range. So right there, that's kind of a problem for me. So even if he's 10, 15, 20% better, is he truly going to be a difference maker to have guys like Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson? I'm not buying that. Also, Jonnu Smith last year in this offense, only averaged 4.6 targets per game because he split work with Anthony Ferkser. And who kind of has a feel for Anthony Ferkser vibes right now? Hayden Hurst. So I think that he's going to probably split some of the work with Hayden Hurst. And then that kind of makes me a little wary of this. And listen, when you look at the history of rookie tight ends, I understand that Kyle Pitts is different. But if you actually dive into the reports from training camp, every single report is how much of a freak athlete, how good he is. But then they also say, but he has still room to grow. He still needs to learn this. He still needs to do that. And my thing is, that's the problem with the tight end position, because it's not just receiving, it's blocking, being involved in every aspect. And Hayden Hurst theoretically could be the every down back as the blocker, as the preferred player on the field. And then Kyle Pitts comes in on passing down. So I just don't want – listen, Mark Andrews is that guy, but he's also 4 years into his career. So I'm just going to pivot away from Kyle Pitts. I'm okay with being wrong on Kyle Pitts this year. In the 4th round, if he was going in the 8th, like with Goddard and Higbee's, probably top 3 pick, but, whatever. But my point is, I'm not going to invest in a rookie tight end when I've seen the history, and I'm okay with being wrong on this one.
Yeah, this is tough, man, because you see the gold at the end of the rainbow, you know what I mean? And like, you want to be ahead of it, because here's the deal. If you're in any sort of keeper league or dynasty, this is your one chance to get quote unquote value on Kyle Pitts. And I agree, 4th round draft capital is not value, but if this guy ends up being Kelsey, Kittle, Gronk, any version of those guys that we've seen, Darren Waller, over the next 10 years, I mean, he's just a cheat code. Rob Gronkowski was a league winner and a 1st-round tight end for 10 years. Travis Kelce's been the same thing for the last 5 or 6. Darren Waller has grown into that as well. And George Kittle, when healthy, is a week winner by himself also. So you want to have that person. And look, man, if Kyle Pitts is what Kyle Pitts could be, the 4th round might be a steal, which I know sounds insane. But if he ends up the wide receiver 6 or 7, like Travis Kelce does, and you're getting him in the 4th round by the wide receiver 24 or whatever, it is value. But it's just a matter of, like, I heard this one time, I forget whose show it was, and I would give credit if I remembered, but I loved the take. And it was simply, if you start your first 3 picks, like heavy running back or wide receiver, whatever it is, let's just make it up. Say you go like Derrick Henry or Zeke Elliott or something, and you go, maybe AJ Brown, and then your 3rd pick is like CEH. Those are pretty safe options. CEH is hurt, bad example, but safe options. Okay. Then you might want to go Kyle Pitts, because you can take that like league winning upside if he blows up, but you could take the brunt if he's just average, which most rookie tight ends are, because you have such a bolstered, solid rest of your lineup. On the other side, if you take, let's say, Saquon Barkley, CEH, maybe DK Metcalf, who I love, but is a bit risky in the 2nd round, you take guys like that who are already risky. I would not touch Kyle Pitts, because he's also risky. And you just like, that's too much. You're playing with too much fire at that point. So if you're safe up at the top, I actually don't hate Kyle Pitts in the 4th or 5th round if you want it, because that's a go for the, you want to win your league. You don't want to play for 3rd. But if you're already risky, I would probably hold off personally.
You know what else is kind of risky this time of year? Drafting in person. But if you do, draft with redzone.com. Listen, guys, everybody, it's fantasy draft season, and I want to make sure that you guys know about Red Zone draft boards. This is not just a draft board. The best part about Red Zone draft boards, it's an entire package. Not only are you getting the draft board and the player stickers, but you also get a championship ring. By the way, this entire package is well under $100, and that's the best part. You get a championship ring, engraved case, a last place sign, but also if you and your friends are not that big into fantasy necessarily and you want a cheat sheet, they come with cheat sheets from fantasypoints.com. And finally, the most important thing, every draft board, $5 gets donated to youth sports. So please make sure if you're going to draft in person this year, you draft with redzone.com and use the promo code TCK. You get 10% off your order. So make sure if you're going to do your drafts this year, you do it with draft with redzone.com.
All right, let's talk about these New Orleans Saints. Holy smokes, man. I went into this breaking down the team, and I was like, we got to talk about the quarterbacks, and we have to talk about Alvin Kamara, and we got to bring up Michael Thomas, and me and everybody else loves Adam Troutman. Like, it's pretty basic. And then, Bobby, of course, us, I started digging in the weeds, And oh boy, I don't even know if we have enough time in the rest of this episode for me to get through the Saints the way that I want to, but here goes everything. Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill. I'll wrap them in quick and then I'll get your response. Jameis Winston came in last year. Taysom Hill, of course, started the 4 games without Drew Brees. Jameis Winston, 7th among active quarterbacks with 7.7 yards per attempt. Thank you, Bruce Arians, for that one. Last year, in the preseason game, earlier this season, Taysom Hill got the start, but Jameis Winston came in. He was 7 for 12, 96 yards and a touchdown. And of course, the Jameis pick every week, but not bad. 7 for 12, 96 yards and a touch. We'll see what happens with Jacksonville. Jameis Winston is going to get the start on Monday night. So I want to definitely see how he reacts to that, of course. He only had 11 total attempts last year in 2020. So we saw him throw for over 5,000 yards, 33 touchdowns in 2019 with Bruce Arians and the Buccaneers, of course. He also threw 30 touchdowns, the first quarterback in NFL history, unfortunately, to meet the 30-30 club, 30 touchdowns, 30 picks. We know Jameis Winston is a lot of kind of risk it, biscuit, run and gun kind of a quarterback. We'll see if that actually happens with Sean Payton, though. I don't think it does because, frankly, I don't think Sean Payton's going to put up with it. He had, Drew Brees, who is as safe and smart, as intelligent and cerebral as they get at quarterback. Jameis Winston has maybe more talent than Drew Brees has had probably in the last handful of years, but they're going to keep him under wraps. Taysom Hill started 4 games last year in 2020, weeks 11, 12, 13, and 14. In those games, he basically, it was a tale of four games, if you want to call it that. The first 2, he was super run heavy, didn't pass as much. 18 attempts, 23 attempts, 18 completions, 16 attempts, 9 completions for 78 yards. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in each of the first 2 games. One of those were Denver, which they literally didn't have a quarterback playing, so it was kind of a weird game. The second 2 games, though, this is, I think, a better representation of what Taysom Hill could be, because I think everybody in the fantasy community expects Taysom Hill to just be this like running quarterback that can throw a little bit. He's better than that. He is a quarterback. He played quarterback in college. I think he's better than that. 37 attempts, 27 completions, 38 attempts, 28 completions against Atlanta and Philadelphia. Terrible secondaries. Nonetheless, he did well. 232 and 2, 291 and 2. The big difference, he had 14 carries and 5 carries in those 2 games. So he threw for 2 touchdowns in the first 2 games. He passed for 2 touchdowns in the next 2 games. He was the QB 6 overall in those 4 games, 11, 12, 13, and 14. He was the QB 8 in points per game overall in those 4 games. Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen each had a bye week during that time and did not play, but he was the QB 6 essentially among who played. So who's it going to be? I think eventually it's going to be Jameis Winston. It only makes the most sense if I was Sean Payton, and of course I'm nothing close to Sean Payton, but if I were, I'm thinking if Jameis plays, I can still do packages with Taysom Hill. That's what they did with a Hall of Famer in Drew Brees. I could still bring him in to play quarterback. He could do wishbone. He can do options. He can catch passes. He runs the ball. Taysom Hill can play his own role in the red zone and on the goal line where they like him, with Jameis Winston still being the quarterback. If Taysom Hill is the quarterback, Jameis Winston, of course, does not have those skill sets that Taysom Hill does. He's out. So now you're running a different kind of a more of a Ravens, I think, offense with a rushing quarterback and a little bit of a throw, So they're going to have packages where Jameis is off and Taysom's in, but ultimately I think the quarterback, unless Jameis completely blows it in the next 2 preseason games, will be Jameis Winston. If that's the case, I expect this offense to be 85, 90% of it was last year, because let's not forget, Drew Brees is a Hall of Famer, but he has not been a Hall of Fame quarterback the last couple of years statistically. His efficiency is amazing. The defense is great, and Alvin Kamara is all world, but didn't have Michael Thomas, won't for the next 6 weeks as well. So Jameis gives him a bump. Taysom gives him more of a floor. I like them both for fantasy. I'll get through the rest of the team, but before we do, how do you feel about the quarterbacks in New Orleans?
Listen, Taysom Hill, if you look at the construction of the roster with no Michael Thomas, they don't have a lot of talent. They don't have good receivers. Their tight ends are very unknown. Nick Vannett, Juwan Johnson,
even Troutman.
Adam Troutman, all these guys, even Marquez Calloway. You name down the list. Even Traequan Smith is banged up. I don't think they can win with Jameis Winston with those kind of players, but they can win with Taysom Hill. Now, Taysom Hill was 3-1 last season as a starter. He lost 1 game by 3 points to the Eagles. So he's already proven that he can win. It's going to be ugly. And yes, one of the games probably doesn't count because it was Denver with the receiver as quarterback. Yeah. But last season, Taysom Hill was number 1 in the NFL in fantasy points per dropback. If this guy wins the job, even beforehand, you should be taking Taysom Hill in the last round, because if he wins the job, he's probably going to be your starter because he was number 1 last year in fantasy points per dropback. But the other aspect of this too, for the Jameis Winston side, people forget that the number 1 team in pass volume from 2011 to 2016 was the Saints. They were one of the most pass-heavy offenses in the NFL. They were the most pass-heavy offense in the NFL. What happened was Drew Brees got older and they made more conservative. They actually dialed back their passing volume, 125 dropbacks on average from 2017 to 2020, because Drew Brees lost his arm strength, wasn't as good as challenging downfield. So it's fair to wonder if Jameis wins this job, can Jameis and will they open the offense back up? And I think that's something you have to consider. This guy's a 5K 30 for 30 guy in 2019. So that could be very interesting. I think Taysom Hill is the best fantasy player on the team other than Alvin Kamara if he wins the job. If Jameis wins the job, now you're talking Marquez Calloway, whoever the tight end becomes more interesting for fantasy.
I totally agree, man. And again, Taysom Hill, you have that rushing upside. It is a cheat code no matter who you are. I just mentioned Ryan Tannehill. Nobody thinks of Ryan Tannehill as a running quarterback. You all think of hand off to Derrick Henry 30 times a game, throw a couple play action touchdowns every once in a while. Ryan Tannehill can run a little bit. He had 7 rushing touchdowns that propelled him all the way to number 7. Taysom Hill, when he played, was QB 6, and that includes a game where he had 16 pass attempts. That's nothing, right? Cam Newton last year, before they just gave up on him, Cam Newton was dominant because he can run the ball and he wasn't even throwing passes. So I like Taysom Hill also. Either way, I'm not as worried now as I was before going into this research, Bobby, about the Saints overall. But I will say, and I don't want to speak this into existence, but if they have any more hiccups, I'll put it that way, any more hiccups on the roster, the Saints as a team are in serious trouble because they do not have depth, unfortunately. And we all know in the NFL, you need to have depth more than anything else. Okay, let's get into my man, Alvin Kamara. Look, I could talk Alvin Kamara for hours. He's probably my favorite player outside of Julio Jones and Larry Fitzgerald in the entire NFL. He's the ECR running back number 3. This is why it gets a little bit contentious here, because people are either like, he's Alvin Kamara. Obviously, he's number 3. People are also like, yeah, but Drew Brees is gone, and can we expect Alvin Kamara to do more? Latavius Murray's going to have a bigger role. What if Taysom Hill's a quarterback and takes all of his rushing opportunity? Yada, yada. So, quick recap of Alvin Kamara's incredible career so far, basically. So he's missed 4 total games in his career. Even as a rookie, he was absolutely dominant. 120 touches, 728, 81, 826, and 14 touchdowns. He was 3rd overall in PPR, 4th in 2018, dropped all the way down to 9th in PPR in 2019. And last year, of course, he was the number 1 overall running back in full PPR. Now, touchdowns for Alvin Kamara have been absolutely unbelievable. 14 as a rookie, 14 total, 14 as a rookie, 18 in 2018 with Mark Ingram, 6 in 2019. That's when everything kind of plummeted for him. 21 touchdowns. And of course, we all remember the 6 touchdown game on Christmas Day. He's had 81 receptions every single season he's played, and he had 83 last year. Alvin Kamara's consistency is, it's Travis Kelce, essentially. You know what you're going to get. You set it and forget it. The question is, can he repeat that? All right. Since 2017, which is Alvin Kamara's rookie year, Drew Brees threw to the running backs 28% of the time. That's excellent for running backs, obviously, and in PPR formats. Jameis Winston, over that same period of time, threw to running backs 18% of the time. So 10% is a lot. That's a huge drop. Alvin Kamara has seen 6.3, 7, 6.8, and 7.1 targets per game average over his 4-year career. That's 100, 105, 95, and 107 from Drew Brees. I do not expect the same numbers to happen from Alvin Kamara, but again, I'm not as nervous as I was before doing this. With Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara averaged 29 PPR fantasy points per game. Without Drew Brees, he's averaged 14 fantasy points, so 15 less, right? A drop in targets from 8 to 4, and the receptions per game from 6 to 2.5. All right. So Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, and Taysom Hill. Over the last 3 seasons, Alvin Kamara has averaged 18, and 18.3 touches per game. So they're going to run the offense through him. I'm not worried about that. I just mentioned his passing work as well. Drew Brees got hurt in week 10 against the 49ers. This is important. Winston played the remaining 34 snaps of that game. It was not Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill started the next 4 games, but Jameis Winston came in immediately following Drew Brees going down in that game against the Niners in week 10. He played the remaining 34 snaps in that game. He threw 10 passes, completing 6 of them. 4 of those 6 completions were to Alvin Kamara. That feels good to me. Extrapolating that full game, that's roughly 7 to 8 targets, which is Alvin Kamara's career average. So again, Sean Payton knows, especially now without Michael Thomas, they have to run through and pass through Alvin Kamara one way or another. And Jameis Winston, I think, will mold to Sean Payton versus Sean Payton trying to mold to Jameis Winston. Kamara has 3 targets in the first 2 games with Taysom Hill. We knew we were all panicking. Everyone was freaking out. But Taysom Hill will not be the starter, in my opinion, all season long. Of course, I don't know for sure, but I don't see that happening. And if they do, they'll be throwing it to him more often. He did have 7 targets in that final game with Taysom Hill there. Michael Thomas is out for 6 to 8 weeks with his ankle surgery that he had in June, which is ridiculous. So he's out for a month or 2. I just mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm not willing to draft him. I don't count on his health. Latavius Murray is coming into his 32-year-old season, sorry. And this offense, again, will run and pass through Alvin Kamara. Volume is king in fantasy football, and Alvin Kamara is a phenomenal running back, as is. I'm not worried about him. He is my number 3. I've got CMC, I've got Dalvin Cook, and I've got Alvin Kamara at number 3. I just think the volume is going to be there, especially without Michael Thomas. I'm okay with him there. If Alvin Kamara ends the season as running back 7, are you going to be disappointed? Sure. Are you still going to be in a great opportunity to maybe win your league? Absolutely. I'm all about Alvin Kamara still. And I'm buying the dip because a lot of people are fading him, so I'm happy to buy the dip.
He's still not NFC ADP number 3. I disagree with you, I think, wholeheartedly. I am not interested in Alvin Kamara at number 3. And listen, if you take out, the Denver game was a disaster. So I don't even include the Denver game. Forget the Denver game last year. But my thing is, I think based on what's going on with this team, Taysom Hill makes the most sense to be the starter. He can win you. They're going to be ugly, but they're going to win games. And listen, Taysom Hill, you don't need to throw that much. Him and Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, whatever, Freeman, whoever's the backup will get a lot of work. But if you just look at the games, you isolate the games, the 3 games with Taysom Hill, and take out that Denver game, he averaged 16.2 points per game. That's good. Alvin Kamara is still an RB1. He's still probably a top half of the RB1 section. But my thing is, I've kind of seen this kind of happening time and time again. Drew Brees was elite at targeting the running back, but he was also elite in his efficiency at targeting the running back. You cannot, him and Phillip Rivers, you cannot replicate that. Tom Brady, you cannot replicate that. Jameis Winston is not going to replicate that. Neither is Taysom Hill. Did you see the target from Taysom Hill to Alvin? It just clunky.
Horrendous.
Clunky. And that's just going to affect him overall. But when you look at the average, so if you take it 16.2 points per game in the 3 games, you take out the Denver game, on average over the last 5 seasons, that would have been 7.6. So between RB7 and RB8. That's where I view Kamara. I'm still taking Kamara in the first round. I'm not fading him completely. But give me Aaron Jones, give me Austin Eckler over him, way over him, even Derrick Henry, even in PPR. I personally am not going to buy him at the 3, 4, 5 pick in the top half of the first round.
Yeah, that's fair. And look, I mean, I have mentioned that I'm very nervous about Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor in the first round too. You pick your poison outside of 3 or 4 guys, man. Everybody's got something that you're nervous about, and they could overcome it or they can't. And that's kind of that's the tough part of drafting in general, but certainly up at the top, because of course you can't win your league in the first round, but you can lose it. All right, let me get into Latavius Murray quickly, and then I'll blast out the wide receivers and then get into my man Troutman. So Latavius Murray in 2019. So I'm gonna throw out 2020. Drew Brees was hurt. They kind of went back and forth, whatever. 2019. Latavius Murray was the running back 1 overall for just 2 weeks, weeks 7 and 8, against Chicago and Arizona, but Alvin Kamara was out in those games 2018. Latavius Murray was the number 1 overall running back for both of those weeks. He was 145, 145, 650, and 4 through the run, and he had 30 catches 30 targets, 200 reception yards, and 1 touchdown. And Alvin Kamara was still top 3 during the time that Latavius Murray was putting in the work. With Teddy Bridgewater in week 7 of that year, not Drew Brees, against the Bears, he had 27 carries, 119 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He also had 5 catches for 31 yards. The following week in Arizona, 21 carries, 102 yards, a touchdown, 12 targets, 9 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Latavius Murray can still get it done. And even though he's in that, dreadful range of 31, 32 years old, he does not have the wear and tear that a lot of running backs do his age. Mark Ingram, Frank Gore, Adrian Peterson, LaShawn McCoy, these kind of guys. He doesn't have the wear and tear that those guys do, so he's a little bit more fresh. They did sign Devonte Freeman. They have UDFA, Tony Jones, who's been pretty impressive in camp, but unless Murray completely bails out or gets injured, I see him being the guy, and then it'll be Kamara and Murray once again. He's still a high-end handcuff, in my opinion, and we saw what Mark Ingram and Kamara could do for a couple of years, and now it's Latavius Murray. If you have Alvin Kamara, I would definitely grab Latavius Murray, and I do expect this to be, no matter who the quarterback is, the offense is going to be running the ball more often to protect Jameis Winston, in my opinion. And again, I do think Jameis is the quarterback, so I'm going to stick with that. They're going to protect Jameis Winston and work more play action versus that risk-it-biscuit we had with Bruce Arians. So I do like Latavius Murray. You're not drafting him by himself, but I do like him as a handcuff. Bobby, any thoughts on Murray, or can I move on to the wide receivers?
I'm not going to touch Murray at all, so you can just move on.
There we go. All right, let's talk about this one. I mean, Alvin Kamara is tough. The quarterback situation's tough. Michael Thomas, man, yikes. 375 PPR points in 2019. That was 100 more than Chris Godwin and Julio Jones that season at number 2 and 3, respectively. 23.5 PPR points per game. That was 4 more points per game than anyone else in the NFL. He set the record, of course, breaking Marvin Harrison's targets and reception numbers. Now, the problem is he's been injured the last 2 years. Thomas played week 1, and then he got hurt and missed 6 games, came back in week 9, but he was already beat up, and it was kind of sketch whether he was going to come back or not. He comes back. Then Thomas played 6 games. He did not score a touchdown, and he averaged only 70 yards per game. He had an ankle injury basically the entire time. I appreciate that he gutted it out and he tried to be the guy to come back for his boys so he and Breeze can look for another Super Bowl run, but he just couldn't do it. He was not himself, and Michael Thomas is not a DK Metcalf, Julio Jones, AJ Brown kind of dominant bully receiver. He is a technician with his feet and route running. When those guys are injured, Odell Beckham, for example, when those guys are injured, their game falls way off because that's what they want. Michael Thomas has averaged 150 targets, 117.5 receptions, 1,378 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns in the last 4 seasons. In the 70 games in his career, he's played 60 of them with Drew Brees. In the 10 games he's played without Drew Brees, which of course will be the remainder of his career, in the 10 games he's played without Drew Brees, he's actually averaged more PPR fantasy points than with Drew Brees, which I thought was very interesting. And it's microscopic almost, but the numbers do weigh, and I can run through them: 18.74 to 18.51, PPR fantasy points, receptions 7.7 to 7.22, targets per game 9.6 to 9.37, and yards 92.3 to 83.78. So the numbers do weigh heavier when he's not with Drew Brees in PPR, which I thought was very interesting. So you asked me, our hot topic at the beginning of the episode was, am I willing to draft Michael Thomas pretty much anywhere? No, I'm not. Obviously, if he falls to the 12th round or something stupid, then sure. But in the 8th, 9th round or whatever, where he's still falling to, no, I'm not going to wait it out. I'm not going to trust his ankle when he comes back, and I'm not going to trust these quarterbacks most likely either. So I'm going to pass on Michael Thomas. How do you feel about Michael Thomas this year? In Dynasty is a whole nother question. Let's keep it to redraft.
I'm not touching him. He's going in the 7th round according to
7th
NFC
now.
ADP.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's not even. No, thank you. Please don't draft Michael Thomas, and let's move on.
Yeah, we do this every year, and unfortunately, I mean, I was the Odell Beckham guy last year, and he got hurt on a fluke play where there was an interception. He tackled a dude and tore his ACL. It was a fluke thing, but Amari Cooper a couple years ago came in after a surgery, and everyone was pounding the table like he's healthy now, like let's go. And he had a lackluster season. When wide receivers have lower body issues, Alshon Jeffrey was classic for this. All of his years in Chicago and then Philadelphia, he could never actually get healthy. When these guys come in post-surgery that season, I'm generally fading him. And Michael Thomas is still getting drafted with the name and 2 years ago. You have to move on in fantasy football, play in the now, and I just don't like that. Okay, I got 2 more guys here. I'm going to get into the backup wide receivers and then Adam Troutman quickly. I don't see you drafting either one of these guys with any confidence, but like Russell Gage, they're going to get targets. Russell Gage had 100 targets last year and was pretty much irrelevant. You're buying the potential opportunity with both of these guys. So I'll get into Traequan Smith here. 80 receptions, 1,109 yards, and 14 touchdowns over his 3 years on only 119 targets. So when he's healthy and he's getting work and he's getting targets, he's very efficient. But with Michael Thomas and Jared Cook and Emmanuel Sanders and Alvin Kamara, obviously, Traequan Smith is the odd man out and just isn't getting the work. This year, he may have to be the number one if he can step up with Michael Thomas out for at least a month, maybe 2. With Thomas out, Smith has a real chance to be that number one. I don't think it's going to be Marquez Calloway, who I'm going to get into in a second, and they don't really have anybody else. Even my boy Troutman, who we'll talk about here, is not going to be the number one look. It's Alvin Kamara, of course, but Traequan Smith should be the guy. We'll see what happens. He's been a little bit banged up over the years too and in camp, so we'll see. He does have an early rapport with Jameis Winston, which I like. Had a nice deep touchdown in the playoffs last year, but they also trained together this offseason down in California. We know how much that, Goff and Kupp were besties for years, roommates and all that stuff. Like that stuff matters. Get the camaraderie and the continuity, if you will, between Traequan Smith and Jameis Winston. I like that. And then last year he had 5 games or more with 6 targets. And Michael Thomas was out. 6 targets isn't amazing, but if he's that number one, you boast that to 8 or 9, he's not going to be Michael Thomas. But he does take the top off, and we know that Jameis likes to do that too. So he's got big playability, just somebody to keep on your radar deep in the end of your draft as a sleeper. Next guy is Marquez Calloway, second-year undrafted free agent out of Tennessee, 6'1", 205. Callaway and Traequan Smith are basically the same body type, more or less, same type of receiver. Seems to kind of be the breakout player in Saints camp so far this summer. He's had a great camp. Thomas is again out a month to a month and a half. Traequan's unproven. Troutman's unproven. It's wide open for Callaway. I think he's a nice late pick in your redraft leagues and a dynasty stash for sure. Either one of these guys could be the number one. Callaway certainly has the talent to do it, but Traequan, I think, has the upper hand because of the seniority, if you will. So I like either of these guys. Bobby, do you think either of these are going to be worth a late round draft pick? And again, they may not come on draft day in the next couple of weekends. Because somebody's got to be the number one. But if they're getting drafted in, the 10th plus round, would it be worth it for you to stash them and see what happens?
Yes, Marquez Calloway is one of my favorite sleepers. I love Marquez Calloway. He has been an absolute dynamo. Even in preseason games, he shows some highlights, but overall, he's been getting all the noise. He's also taking over the Michael Thomas role.
Yep.
So he's playing the role that Taysom Hill gave 10 targets to per game last year, and he's been proving it intermediate deep in that game. I'm a Taysom Hill guy. You're a Winston guy. But either way, I think Marquez Calloway in the 12th round is a must-have player this season.
I love it, dude. You're a Taysom Hill, Marquez Calloway guy, and I'm a Jameis and Traequan guy, and we'll see what happens. All right, last but not least, this one's a fun one. I know it wasn't pretty preseason game 1. We'll see what happens Monday night against Jacksonville, but Adam Troutman. I know Mike Wright, shouts out to Mike Wright. I love the Hitman. Big fan. He gets all the credit for alerting the fantasy community of Adam Troutman, but just to throw it out there, I was also talking about it possibly before him. I digress. ECR, tight end 16. He's my tight end 12. ADP in the 13th round in between Evan Ingram and Rob Gronkowski. Nobody wants anything to do with those guys. Adam Troutman's down there too. In 2019, Jared Cook was the tight end 7 at 32 years old in this offense. He had at least 4 targets in 9 of 14 games and 3 targets in 3 more of those games. In that same season, 2019, Jameis is with the Bucks, throwing for 5,000 yards, 33 touchdowns, yada, yada. With Tampa Bay, Cameron Brate and O.J. Howard combined for 175 PPR fantasy points, which would have been ahead of Jared Cook at tight end 7. So Jared Cook with Drew Brees in that offense and Cameron Brate and O.J. Howard in their offense at Tampa Bay had almost identical fantasy seasons at tight end 7. So this whole Jameis Winston doesn't throw to his tight end, doesn't throw to his running back, I think is just false, especially with the Saints offense. That should increase, in my opinion. If Hill is the QB, I'm less excited about Troutman, of course, for obvious reasons. But if Winston is, I expect a semi-high-powered offense at least, field stretching ability, and Troutman can be that guy also in the red zone. We know that Alvin Kamara is going to get the first and the second look, but it should be, Troutman, and then Traequan, if he doesn't stick or Callaway doesn't stick, should be Troutman in the red zone. And, again, Troutman was not targeted by Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill in the first preseason game, but let's see what happens opening, Monday night with the Jaguars. I'm still holding out faith, and if he gets 4 targets or catches a touchdown, I'm still all in.
Yeah, I'm out on Adam Troutman, 100% because of the Johnson news, and also because of the Nick Vannett being way too involved in the first team. I think that Troutman's going to be the blocking tight end once again, so I'm out. But yeah, that's how I feel about Troutman. I'm going to fade him 100%.
Fair enough. All right, y'all. I want to give a quick shout out to the Jersey Jungle. I want to give a shout out here. I got some jerseys on the way. I'm going to do an unboxing. Make sure you hit them up on Instagram, the Jersey Jungle. Use the promo code TCK to receive 10 to 15% off of your authentic jerseys. And all the people checking us out maybe for the first time here on the Fantasy Football Network, make sure you go hit up the Jersey Jungle, man. The jerseys behind me, Julio Jones, my man Mike Allstott, one of my favorites of all time. You can get great jerseys there, and of course expand the box score as we had mentioned early on. You can check that out as well. Use the promo code TCK, $5 off, $20, a 4-day free trial. Go and try it today. Expandtheboxscore.com and use the promo code TCK. Bobby, this is the first episode on the network, but you and I have been doing this for 436 episodes here, so we've been fine-tuned for a long time. But final thoughts here, man, on the first day on the network. I'm just very excited to be a part of the team here.
Listen, there's a great show coming up right now after us. We got to get out of here. I love everybody. I love this experience, but keep watching the Fantasy Football Network.
Appreciate you. Find us on Twitter, Sky Guasco and Bobby Lamarco. We'll catch you next time. For my man, Bobby Lamarco, shouts out to Kyle and Corey Dozer and the Fantasy Football Network. We'll catch you next time. For Bobby Lamarco, I'm Sky Guasco. We are out of here.